Manager here. With me is Eric Hartstein, Policy Coordinator and also FIP Manager, Leah Tai, Partnerships Coordinator, and Andrew Dutter, also Partnerships Coordinator. On the webinar today, we do encourage folks to use the chat box that you see on the right side of your screen. When questions arise, we'll be monitoring that here in the room and responding as appropriate to those. We will be muting the phone so that we don't have to worry about any background noise or anything like that. So we're going to go ahead and mute the phone right now. And again, if you do have questions or comments, please do use the chat box and we will follow up either in real time or at an appropriate pause. So with that, we're going to dive right in here. And I just wanted to note that before we do that, if you do wish to, you can refer to the FIP application as we're going through. It's not necessary for you to do that, but the application is accessible via OGMAS or GoUp website. To begin with a little bit of background and how we arrived at where we are with the Focused Investment Partnership Program, it really stemmed from OWEB's long-term investment strategy that was adopted by our board several years ago now, back in 2013. And that long-term investment strategy included 4 components to it: operating capacity, which is a program we're really happy to have in Oregon that helps watershed councils and soil and water conservation districts just simply pay for operating costs. Of course, the regular open solicitation grant program is a key part of our investment strategy. That is a responsive grant program across the state for competitive proposals based on local priorities. And then the subject of this webinar, the Focused Investment Partnership Program, is intended to help collaborative partnerships achieve prioritized ecological outcomes at the landscape scale and hopefully producing measurable results at that scale. And the 4th component is our monitoring program, which we have really throughout all of the different grant offerings that we have, including the FIP program. The next slide gives us an overview of OWEB's spending plan. The slide that you will see in a few minutes here gives you the spending plan adopted by our board for the current biennium, which is the 2019-2021 biennium. And it gives you the approximate, well, actually in some detail, the division of the spending plan by program, including the major categories of open solicitation, which is our regular competitive grants that are about $57 million, almost $58 million, or 55% of our spending on grants. The FIP program, which is currently at about $27 million and about 26% of our overall spending. Operating capacity at $16 million, or about 15%. And then you see a small piece of the pie for our other grant offerings. Now, this is a current biennium, and of course, we're soliciting for implementation FIP initiatives for the next biennium, which is 21-23. We do anticipate that the board will maintain a similar breakdown of spending in the next biennium's plan. And if they do that, we can expect to have about $7 million available in the next biennium, which will support 2 to 3 new FIP initiatives. And of course, that depends on what folks come in with proposals for and how they're evaluated. We have been averaging about $2.5 million per FIP per biennium, and the board has expressed guidance to see an average in that neighborhood. But if you've looked at our guidance, you can see that folks are welcome to apply for up to $4 million per biennium. Next, we're going to move into some program information. I'll turn it over to Eric Hartstein.
Great. Thank you, Eric. So just before I dive into this slide, just a reminder that if you do have questions, please feel free to use the chat box. We will be monitoring that closely. So the FIP program definition and goals, these 4 bullet points are directly from the administrative rules for the FIP program that were adopted by the OWEB board in January of 2018. And if you're so inclined, you can go onto the link there and read all of the rules for the FIP program. Just to summarize, it's by definition, the FIP program supports collaborative partnerships in achieving prioritized ecological outcomes at the landscape scale. I want to highlight at the maybe the last two bullets there that include developing a strategic action plan or implemented by a high-performing partnership. Some of you may have been through or been aware of the development program. So that has helped partnerships come up with a strategic action plan and really strengthen their partnership to make it into that high-performing entity. And the development FIP program has ended and shifted over to what we're calling the Partnership Technical Assistance Program, which is no longer associated with the FIP program. So partnerships do not need to be working within a web board identified FIP priority, which I'll get into here in a second. But it really does help with developing that strategic action plan, which can be used for a FIP implementation application later on, and strengthening that partnership. So there's the two tracks for the partnership TA program: partnership development and partnership capacity. The next cycle we announced this summer, and the application is due in October, with board awards in January of 2021. So the board FIP priorities that I referenced a moment ago, we have 7 of them here. They were developed through a process that began in 2014, which included the solicitation of ideas from conservation partners across the state. And this first set of priorities was adopted by the OWEB board back in April of 2015. Every initiative must address a board identified priority. These are available on the website. Should note also that they are required to be updated by the board at least every 5 years. Back in October, and just last month, the board adopted updated priorities, and most of those are pretty minor. And so the priorities are the same. We just went through and kind of made some tweaks on some of those that the board adopted. There is a new map for the native fish priority, which I'll get to in a second. That the next slide has to do with ecological theory of change diagrams for the FIP priorities. So these are new documents, pretty cool to look at for those of you with, I guess, left brain or right brain, however it works, to visualize these sorts of things. So this is really just a visualization tool for the FIP priorities. Again, it's up on the website, shows linkages between limiting factors and strategies leading to outputs, outcomes, and ultimately results at an ecological scale. So we also have maps that are associated with the ecological priorities. Here's an example from the native fish priority habitat map. And again, there are 7 maps associated with the 7 priorities. You want to make sure, if you're considering a FIP application, to ensure that your work falls within the FIP geographic priority. For example, this is the aquatic habitat for native fish species priority, so it includes eligible watersheds for FIP funding, which are in the green and the yellow. If you're in the red, it would be ineligible.
Okay, thanks, Eric, and good morning, everyone. Andrew Dutter at OWEB. So I'm going to take a closer look at how FIP initiatives work, and then we'll turn to Leah, who will provide discussion of the application process and timeline. And again, feel free to use the chat box to ask clarifying questions as we go. So as Eric mentioned shortly ago, a FIP initiative is one that is guided by a strategic action plan and implemented by a high-performing partnership for up to 6 years or 3 biennia and a maximum of $12 million. And that would be up to $4 million per biennia. The high-performing partnership is defined in FIP rule as a collaborating group of organizations with an existing governance structure that includes a formal decision-making process resulting in an effective performance history. And so some of those pieces, the formal decision-making process, that would be documented perhaps in the partnership's governance documents, MOU, operations manual, things of that nature. And those materials are required at the time of application. There's details on that in the application. In regards to the strategic action plan, we have the graphic on the screen here that illustrates how the action plan, the initiative, and the work plan are nested within each one another. The strategic action plan is essentially the conservation strategy, the long-term conservation strategy for a partnership. And generally, they cover a relatively larger geography, perhaps a watershed or other landscape. They might be in the range of 10 to 30 years or as much as 50 years. And similarly, these strategic action plans are also required with the application. They can be written in any format, but OWEB does require that they address the components in OWEB's strategic action plan guidance. And that guidance is available on the FIP webpage on the OWEB site. There are also links in the application. You can explore that further. Looking at the initiative itself, this is the conservation or restoration program that a partnership will pursue with the FIP funding. And it could be the entirety of the strategic action plan, but most commonly it is a portion of or a bite of that strategic action plan that the partnership feels it can accomplish within that 6-year period and up to $12 million. And lastly, the work plan is the outline of actions or projects that the partnership intends to pursue in each biennium. And so the application asks for a detailed work plan for the first biennium, and we will, OWEB, for awarded partnerships, OWEB will ask for an updated work plan each successive biennium after that. And we had a question during the registration for some additional details on the work plan. So I'll spend another moment talking about that. These work plans, we see quite a range of different approaches to the work plans. We have in the past with various applications. It could be a list of restoration actions that the partnership intends to pursue with associated outputs. It could be a list of specific projects or some combination thereof. We're intentionally flexible in what we are asking for if you look at the work plan section of the application, and that is intended to accommodate each partnership's unique needs, the landscapes you're working in, and so that you can structure a work plan that best suits what you're trying to do. But in all cases, it essentially provides the basis for your project pipeline for the biennium. And as we've seen in the past with the currently funded FIP initiatives, that work plan is really important, because rarely is there ever a case where there's not some type of adjustment needed to the sequencing of projects through the course of a biennium, given certain emerging priorities or other conditions that would require different projects to be reorganized through the work plan. So I'll leave it at that. If you have additional questions on the work plan, feel free to ask via the chat box. The next slide is a map of the current initiatives funded around the state. And don't need to spend a lot of time here, but just wanted to highlight some of the diversity of locations where these initiatives are occurring and the various priorities that they're addressing. There's 11 listed here. We're actually now have 10 FIP initiatives that are currently in progress. We had one that was our first initiative that completed last fall. Probably a good opportunity to say that a FIP initiative is complete when all of the funds for that initiative have been obligated in grant agreements. So those funds will continue to be spent over the years to come as projects are implemented. But once all that funding is in grant agreement, that's when an initiative is officially complete. This map and other details on specific currently funded initiatives are available on through the FIP website on the website. For partnerships that receive FIP funding for their initiative, there's a few components to keep in mind that follow. The first is that once a FIP is awarded, OWEB will help guide some of the kickoff activities to prepare for the funding to become available and the initiative to begin, including being assigned an OWEB FIP coordinator or project manager among staff here. Myself, Andrew, Leah, and Eric Hartstein are currently our FIP coordinators. In some cases, OWEB field staff or regional program representatives may also be involved in managing a FIP initiative. Another important item to note is that although OWEB awards a partnership its biennial funding, those funds remain with OWEB in a holding account, and they are allocated to the partnership via project applications and project grant agreements. And so what that means is that although you're applying at the initiative level here, as we're discussing today, for awarded partnerships, they will come in through a project application process and technical review process. And so that's how those FIP funds are allocated on the ground. That means that every FIP partnership, all of those 11 that we saw on that map, has a technical review process to look at individual projects. We have flexibility within the FIP program to arrange those technical review meetings, the timing, the structure of the meeting, and so on, collaboratively with OWEB staff and each partnership. And the intent there is to set those meetings up so that it best suits the needs of the partnership in terms of timing of implementing projects and so on. There are a few key pieces that each technical review will address, such as ensuring technical soundness of the project, ensuring alignment with the strategic action plan, and then ensuring that the application captures all of the details of the project as it serves as the scope of work or scope of services for the project. But at the project level, it's not a competitive granting basis because the FIP awards have already been made to the partnership. So instead, the emphasis is on ensuring those pieces I just mentioned and revising or adjusting projects to meet that bar of those various elements. And so again, that's a process that each partnership will work collaboratively with OWEB staff to establish the application and review process. A rule that is in the FIP administrative rules, and this is something that we pretty commonly get questions about, so we wanted to address it head on with you all and see if there were any questions about it. Essentially, the question is, what does it mean for eligibility in OWEB's open solicitation program if there is a FIP initiative operating in the same geography? Any project that would occur in a FIP initiative geography and pursue the same actions outlined in a FIP initiative is not eligible for open solicitation through the duration of that FIP initiative. And there's really two filters in determining overlap. The first is geography. That tends to be pretty straightforward. It's either in the partnership's initiative geography or not. The second is related to those restoration actions. And anytime a project comes up, OWEB staff will work with the project applicant as well as the partnership to help make that determination of whether that project is eligible for open solicitation or not. And the rule serves two purposes, really. One, it prevents FIP partners from essentially drawing OWEB funds from both the FIP program and open solicitation. So essentially it prevents double dipping in OEB programs, but it also ensures that OEB is investing in the highest priority projects as determined by the partnership, the partners operating on the ground. So when OEB invests in any FIP initiative, we're not just investing in the restoration actions, but also in the partnership's ability to identify, prioritize, and sequence those projects. And so the assumption is that if a project comes into open solicitation through a non-partner entity, that project hasn't been vetted through the partnership's prioritization process. And I'll give you, I see we have one question. Does the overlap apply to small grants? It does not apply to small grants. There's a few other programs it also does not apply to strategic implementation areas and forest collaboratives as well, and wheat grants. So essentially what we're looking at with this rule is open solicitation, so the standard restoration, TA, monitoring, stakeholder engagement, and both land and water acquisition grants. And I'll provide a quick example too to help ground the discussion. If a FIP initiative is seeking to pursue in-stream habitat restoration in their FIP geography, call it Watershed A, and either a partner or a non-partner entity wants to do upland forest health, maybe juniper thinning in that same watershed, then those forest health projects would be eligible in open solicitation because they are not in-stream habitat actions. Conversely, if a non-partner entity were to want to pursue in-stream habitat work in that watershed, they would be ineligible to apply to open solicitation, and we would guide them to the partnership to have a discussion about whether that project falls within the partnership's prioritization of projects in that watershed, and would be something that the partnership would want to support with FIP funding. If you have questions about that rule, we're certainly happy to take those. Again, it's something that comes up with some regularity. I think one thing that's important to keep in mind with this is that it really emphasizes the importance for each partnership to make sure that you have the right partners involved in your partnership, and if there are partners that aren't involved, that you're conducting outreach to those partners accordingly to make sure that they're aware of the initiative, the geography, and its goals. And with that, I'll turn to Leah to discuss the application process.
Great, thanks, Andrew. This is Leah Tai here, and I'm just going to talk about the FIP initiative application and some of the requirements. In addition to the application, which is available on our website, each partnership must also submit by the deadline a letter of partnership from each core partner, color maps of the initiative geography, the strategic action plan that Andrew was discussing earlier, partnership government documents, and work plans. Along with that, in the budget, the partnership must demonstrate that they have a 25% overall match biennially at the initiative level. The budget section of the application has the initiative divide out their proposed budget by grant type, such as restoration, land acquisition, monitoring, stakeholder engagement, technical assistance, as well as partnership capacity and coordination. One thing I wanted to note here is the difference between partnership capacity and stakeholder engagement. Capacity activities are primarily inward facing, so those funds would be used towards managing your partnership, having meetings, and discussing planning and future work plans or changes, programmatic monitoring, meetings, etc. Whereas the stakeholder engagement funding would be used for outward facing activities that your partnership is trying to engage in external audiences, perhaps private landowners or other partners that you're bringing into the work that you're doing. One thing about budget categories I wanted to note was just that OEB recognizes the importance and the demand on partnership capacity funds, and managing these large partnerships takes a lot of work. So each initiative is unique and would be budgeted differently, but that category is there to help give the partnership the ability to fund some of the activities that they're doing at that high level in their planning and partnership work. And I also wanted to note that partnerships that have previously been awarded OWEB implementation FIP funding are eligible to reapply for this solicitation. A few things on that reapplication to note. The performance on the previous FIP initiative will be considered during the evaluation of this next application cycle. So if a partnership is reapplying, their former progress and outputs and outcomes would be part of the evaluation. Partnerships must also have obligated in project agreements all of their FIP funds, if they have not done so already, or have confirmed a clear path towards obligating those funds prior to January 2021. And partnerships may apply for initiatives in the same conservation action and geography as they've used in the past, or they may apply for different geography and different conservation actions. So if your partnership is interested in reapplying for the FIP program, feel free to follow up with additional questions if you would like clarity about the reapplication process. There are several questions in the application that are geared towards partnerships that are reapplying.
There's a question in the chat box. This is Eric Williams, and it's a very good question, one which, as Leah was talking, we were conversing about it in the background. Generally speaking, the question is about match. The question is, our partnership includes Washington geography. Can Washington projects that are described in our SAP but not funded by OWEB be used as match? Generally speaking, match projects must be eligible for OWEB funds, which would mean the answer is no. However, we would like to take some time and confer internally about that, and then get back to you following the webinar with a definitive answer on that question, because it is a good question. It makes a lot of sense that a FIP that's along the border and shares geography in two states could be set up that way. So we will get back to you with an answer on that question.
Thanks, Eric. And so I'll move on to the next slide if there are no further questions about the application, match, and budget, and talk a little bit about application evaluation criteria. In our FIP administrative rules, we have several evaluation criteria listed on this slide and the next slide. Expert partnership capacity and ecological review teams will evaluate all applications based on these criteria this fall, and then following their evaluations, the board, OWEB's Focus Investment Committee will interview each applicant in November. We will share the results of the technical review prior to interviews with the board subcommittee. Each applicant will have an interview opportunity in November. And the following evaluation criteria, I won't read through all of them, but I'll just highlight a few things and then show you all a diagram that just describes the evaluation criteria in general. But they are, as we've talked about before, addressing a board identified priority, a partnership's ability to capacity to engage with their community and partners within their initiative geography, their history and the composition of their partnership, the extent to which their application addresses ecological outcomes, their ability to monitor and track their progress, scientific basis for their initiative, and their budget allocation of funds across different grant types. And the diagram that you see on your screen is a visual representation of these 7 criteria to give you an idea of how they come together holistically in our evaluation process. So we're really looking at partnership efficacy, the cost effectiveness, the technical soundness, and the conservation strategy and ecological outputs that the initiative is aiming to achieve.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. And so I see we have another question. Can we expand on an existing FIP geography, or does it have to be a completely new geography? The short answer, I think, is yes. We have a means in the application to apply for continuation of a previous FIP investment. So I encourage you to look at that. There's it's section maybe 5 or 6 in the application. There's some additional details around that and an additional question that asks the partnership some specifics about why that continued investment is important. If you're talking about a different strategic action plan and a discretely different geography, then it may be that you don't need to follow the continued investment path there. So I think it's a good question, and one that, again, take a look at that section in the application, and maybe we can follow up with you and your partnership during your consultation to get into more of the specifics and how it applies to in your case.
Just to recap really quickly on the evaluation process, applications are due at the end of June, and we'll be using this evaluation criteria to review each application. Our expert review teams will be conducting those reviews in the fall, and then we'll be providing those evaluations to each applicant prior to their interview with the OWEB committee in November. Next, I want to touch quickly on progress monitoring and reporting, which is an important aspect of awarded FIPs. As noted in OWEB Strategic Action Plan guidance, there is an expectation that partnerships applying for FIP funding have developed a theory of change and progress monitoring framework related to their strategic action plan. And when partnerships have done that, that will help them to identify conservation outputs and ecological outcomes that will be monitored throughout the life of their FIP. Strongest proposals will have a results chain and monitoring framework that incorporates a programmatic monitoring approach in lieu of simply a project-by-project monitoring approach. And OWEB staff and FIP partners work collaboratively during the life of the FIP to monitor the progress of an initiative. Following the board selection of initiatives for FIP funding, OWEB staff reach out to and work with each partnership to establish an approach to tracking the progress of the initiative. And the outputs of that progress tracking are presented to the board each biennia, typically in January of odd number years, by the partnership themselves. OWEB also works with the partnership to create progress tracking reports. And what you're seeing on the screen is an example of a progress tracking reports from the Deschutes FIP. These are succinct 6-page documents that summarize the work of the partnership over the last biennia, outputs, and some lessons learned throughout that time period. They're a high-level summary that is condensedly written to help to communicate some of the progress of the FIP. And these progress tracking reports for the current active FIPs will be available on our website shortly. Or they are available, but they'll be on the FIP website shortly. And there's one for each FIP that was awarded in the first cohort in 2015. So now I'm going to talk briefly about the application timeline. As I mentioned earlier, applications are due to OWEB June 30th by 5 p.m. All the required documents must be emailed to the link in the application. Prior to that application deadline though, each partnership needs to do a required application consultation with OWEB staff. And the contact information for that consultation is on the slide in front of you, Christy Primley. So you can give her a call and schedule a 1-hour informal conference call. These consultations are really for OWEB and partnerships to get on the same page. They're not part of the evaluation process, and not all partners are required to attend the consultation. OWEB defers to the partnership to determine who should represent the partnership during that consultation. And the purpose is really to familiarize OWEB with the strategic action plan, the concept for the FIP initiative, ensure that the partnership is eligible for our program, discuss any questions, discuss the solicitation timeline, and just help make sure that the partnership has all the information they need to create a strong competitive proposal. So just remember, the consultation is not evaluative, but it does need to occur prior to April 30th. So if your partnership is planning to submit an application, I recommend you reach out to Christy soon and schedule your consultation. And as I mentioned earlier, the review process will happen at the end of the summer to fall. In November, we'll schedule interviews with the OWEB Focus Investment Committee. And then in January of 2021, OWEB's board will evaluate the results of the technical review team meetings and recommendations and select initiatives for funding. The funding will be officially awarded by the OWEB board in July of 2021. But prior to that, partnership kickoff meetings will be held for each partnership that's scheduled to receive FIP implementation funding. We've come to our last slide. So we have ample time to take questions and discuss any clarifying things that people may want to ask. And I just want to point out several contacts on the screen. All of us here, this is our contact information, as well as links to our application, other information on the FIP program, our strategic action plan, and our administrative rules. So with that, I'll wrap up. And if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box and we will address them. Thank you. So our first question is, what would be the effective start date of project implementation if a FIP is awarded? And so the FIP award date would be the July board meeting in 2021.
And when the board makes those awards at their July meeting, they will typically include in their motion that the award is effective from the beginning of the biennium, which is July 1st of 2021.
And this is Andrew. That said, as the partnership goes through the course of the biennium, the individual projects may have varying start dates depending on when those projects proposals are submitted and the grant agreements are developed. But they wouldn't date any earlier than that July 1 date.
And we also have a question on how to demonstrate match in the application.
Yeah, this is Eric Hartstein. The demonstrated match in the overall FIP application is it's just checking that box there. We're not requiring any separate documentation at that time that shows that match is either secured or pending. It's just your best estimate of the match at that time. Once you get to project implementation, that's when we would require having match documentation submitted to OWEB.
And we have another question. How long does it typically take to enter into individual project agreements following FIP award?
This is Eric Williams. That's a really good question because once you're awarded, you want to get started right away. But of course, as Andrew mentioned in his part of the presentation, we do award the funds through individual project level agreements, which do undergo technical review. And so what we'll do is during the startup phase, we will work with you to develop partnership agreements between OWEB and the partnership that will specify the technical review process. We'll work with you to get review team members to review those project level applications. And then it's a matter of as quickly as we can convene that group, we will need to first open up an application cycle, have your project level applications in for that first review cycle, then give the reviewers some time to review them, do site visits if necessary for restoration projects, hold the review team meeting, and then typically the way that process works, and this is different from open solicitation, is based on the technical review meeting, we will have some comments that may require revisions to the application. So then we will work with the partnership to have the applicant organization go back in and make those adjustments based on technical review, and then we'll be ready for a grant agreement. So I think if it might be best to plan on that first cycle being completed sometime more towards the fall than in the summer, than in July or August, just simply to allow that application process to happen and the review process to happen to make sure that we do have adequate technical review of all of our projects. And so we don't have a deadline schedule for that, but for planning purposes, probably thinking about October, November would be a reasonable time frame.
And the next question that we received about that review process was what is the composition of a project technical review team? Is it OWEB staff or a combination of other partners and folks? That technical review team is different for each partnership, and the OWEB staff work with the partnership to identify potential technical review team members. Not OWEB staff, usually experts from the appropriate ecological field. And so they'll come up with a list together and then solicit the membership of the technical review team. It'll be about 5 to 8 members, so similar to other technical review teams.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. And this is Andrew. I'd just add, because to emphasize that the review team, OWEB manages and coordinates the review team, but we are very interested in working with the partnership to recruit the right folks, the right expertise that is relevant to the specific restoration actions that the partnership will be pursuing, and also folks that the partnership may have standing working relationships with, and folks that can provide the right type of collaborative feedback to help improve projects and ensure that technical soundness. So there's definitely a lot of communication between OWEB and the partnership in developing the review team and its composition. And as Leah said, those teams are focused on the specific aspects that a FIP initiative is doing. So the teams tend to be a bit more sort of tighter in nature, 5 to 8 members, maybe a few more, whereas some other OWEB review teams might be larger to encompass a broad set of actions. That's something OWEB will definitely be working with the partnership on once they work.
And just one final additional comment to that. This is Eric Williams again. We do often include the OWEB regional program representative as a member of the technical review team for a FIP program as well, depending on the nature of the FIP. And so that is one occasion where an OWEB staffer might also be added to that team.
And there's several new questions, but the follow-up question from Lindsay is, we have broad representation in our region with elk folk. Could these partners be part of the review team, or do they need to be external to the partnership?
The review team members are external to the partnership, although sometimes there is some overlap depending on where you're working. If given that a FIP may have a high level of focus, and in some areas there simply aren't a broad pool of folks to draw on for that. So we try to ensure some degree of kind of third-party review, but also, again, want to make sure that the partnership has the right folks in the room to provide the feedback that they feel like will help with their project planning and implementation. And again, the emphasis of these project level reviews is on ensuring technical soundness. It's not a competitive process. So, OWEB is interested in making sure that each partnership has those folks that they feel like can provide that type of input. So there may be some overlap.
This is Eric Williams. I would add to that what might be fairly typical is that partnership members who are employees of state or federal agencies are often the partnership members that are called in to be part of the technical review team. And one of the reasons for that is their state and federal agencies are not eligible to be grant recipients, so they won't have any project level grants going to their agencies, and it provides, I think, that additional level of objectivity.
And we got several questions about match. So the first one is, can we use match funds to start specific projects sooner than the July award date?
Yeah, this is Eric Carson. I'll answer that one. You can start projects with external funding at any time you would like. However, I'd throw a couple of caveats into there. One is that you'd be doing it with some modicum of risk before July 1. Don't anticipate the Cascadia earthquake occurring, but if it does, funding to OWEB might be short, might be delayed. And there's also probably the higher risk caveat would be we wouldn't be able to fund elements of those projects that occur before July 1st. So you'd want to be really careful about how you delineate project activities if you want to start a project before July 1st. The expectation that FIP funds would go in and support it later on.
And another question, Eric, about match was related to PCSRF. FIP funding, could that potentially have federal funding that counts as match? And does FIP use PCSRF funds sometimes?
The answer is yes. Independently obtained federal funding can count as match. For any initiatives that are benefiting salmon and steelhead, for restoration and TA projects, OWEB will seek to use PCSRF funding as much as possible and is appropriate to the project. So the other federal match can be counted, and your OWEB FIP coordinator would work with you on a project by project basis to ensure the right alignment or allocation of state and federal funds to meet the project needs for match.
Our next question is whether projects can occur on state and federal land if the project recipient is not a state or federal grantee.
Yes, this is Eric Williams. The answer is yes, and that is a fairly frequent occurrence with OWEB grants. Of course, we need something in writing from the state or federal agency that is allowing permission for the project to happen there. In fact, in addition to projects happening on state or federal land, there are occasions where the contracted services line item in the budget will include some funds that are going to that state or federal agency to make sure that the project can happen. So short answer is yes. Longer answer is there's many aspects of that and details that are eligible for OWEB funding.
And I had one question emailed into me from somebody that had trouble with the chat interface. So I just wanted to briefly touch on the maps that we discussed earlier in the presentation of the ecological priorities. On our FIP webpage, you can see a memo that describes each ecological priority. And with that, there are several maps. And so if you read the text of the priority memo, it will describe what's represented in the map. For the native fish species example, the map is color-coded green, yellow, and red. The green is the highest priority, the yellow areas are the second highest priority, and the red or orange is the lowest priority. And the green and yellow areas on the map are areas that are eligible for FIP initiative funding.
The question is, how far prior to July 1 can match funds be counted for projects described in our initiative? Is there a limit? So we don't have a strict limit on going back in time and match be used for an OWEB project. I think what we typically do is use the straight face test. And if it's a project that occurred 10 years ago and it's in the same geography and similar actions, but you really have a tough time making the case that this is truly match for this project that's 10 years after, yeah, that's not going to be counted as match. Now, if that project occurred, say, a year ago and it's the adjacent landowner and you're tying in a riparian planting into this existing riparian planting that occurred last year, then yeah, I think that would be much more favorable if you look at it from a match perspective. And I welcome my colleagues' thoughts on this as well.
That was a good answer, Eric.
If you have specific projects that you're thinking about that you're trying to get started this, prior to that July 1 date, in the in-water work period next year, that might be something that you can discuss during your consultation with the OWEB staff in more detail.
And afterwards, once the board makes its selections and we're headed towards July 1st, you can always confer with your program manager to talk through specific examples and specific projects, and we'll just work through that with you in conversation and get into the details. But generally speaking, the way Eric characterized it is the way we would approach those questions.
Our contact information is on the slide that you can see now, so feel free to follow up with additional questions and contact Christy Primley to schedule your consultation if your partnership is intending to apply for the 2021-23 solicitation.
And this is Andrew. I was just going to add, for any folks that are planning to be at Connect in April, Courtney Schaff and myself will be doing a talk on the FIP program and partnership TA, and we'll include some discussion of this application process. So if you're planning to attend Connect and want to discuss this further, we hope to see you there.
So thanks everyone for your time today, and we really appreciate your attention and are available for, as Leah said, any follow-up questions and conversations. So take care everyone and enjoy the weekend.
Thanks.
Thank you.